I am very happy to introduce Kris Reynolds, and he will be presenting Tying It Together and How Carbon Can Benefit You. Kris Reynolds is the Midwest Regional Director of America Farmland Trust for the Midwest. His primary responsibility is managing programs in the Midwest that promote sound farming practices that help keep farmers on the land and also help to protect that farmland. He is also responsible for working with partners to coordinate activities with both farmers and landowners that improve water quality and soil health, enhance nutrient efficiency, and utilize conservation cropping systems to combat climate change and meet the goals of the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. Kris is a certified crop advisor with the American Society of Agronomy and holds a specialty certification as a 4R nutrient management specialist and a sustainability specialist. Reynolds holds a bachelor's degree in agronomy and ag business from Illinois State University and is also a fifth-generation corn and soybean farmer from Nokomis, Illinois, and he grew up on both a grain and a livestock farm. He began his soil health journey in 2013 by incorporating cover crops, no-till, and nutrient management practices into his own farming operation and continues to expand and improve their use on his farm every year. This session will discuss how conservation practices like cover crops and no-till are adopted and managed properly, that they can help increase the amount of carbon stored in the soil on cropland and make your farm more resilient and profitable. These practices also help farmers combat climate change, improve downstream water quality, and make the soil healthier. Please help me welcome Kris to the 2022 Soybean Summit.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks, Megan, for that introduction. So happy to be here today and be in person, and really excited to talk with everyone a little bit about carbon and hopefully answer some questions at the end as well. If you're a farmer and you came here to try to figure out what carbon market's the best for you to get into, we're just barely going to touch on that today. Really want to focus on the carbon's value in improving soil health and improving water quality and some of the environmental benefits that come along with increasing carbon in your soil. So as Megan kind of mentioned there with the introduction, agriculture has always been a part of my life. Grew up on a farm, a diversified grain and livestock farm. Still part of that farm today. Worked for a soil and water conservation district for almost 16 years in the early part of my career, and really, gained firsthand knowledge just working with other farmers, some of the concerns that they had on their farm, and those, certainly had changed over time. When I first started working, it was more about soil erosion. T by 2000 was the big campaign at that time. Trying to prevent soil erosion on our fields. And that, certainly started to change in 2015 with the release of the Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. So I came to AFT in 2017 and was really just passionate about the work that they were doing in the region and nationwide. And if you haven't heard of American Farmland Trust, we have the tagline, "No farms, no food." You may have seen some of those stickers in the past. But really, we're about promoting sound farming practices and keeping farmers on the land and protecting that farmland. So it's about the people and the places in agriculture. The photo on the left here is of my grandfather in the early 70s. That's a Case 930 tractor. I still use that tractor on the farm today. And when I think about that photo and I think about how agriculture has changed over time, I think he's cultivating soybeans in that photo there. We know that farmers have the ability to adapt and have the ability to adopt new technologies. We've certainly seen that over time. The photo in the middle, I started doing some cover crops on my farm in 2013. That's my youngest son, who's now a teenager. But that was the first year I grew soybeans into cereal rye for a cover crop. I also just want to give a shout out to the STAR program, Saving Tomorrow's Ag Resources program. I've taken advantage of the last couple of years. I think the sign-up ended yesterday, so I really can't promote farmers to go on and sign up for that program and to fill out those field forms, but certainly something to look at. I'm going to really focus on some background information, talk more about, where are we currently at with the adoption of soil health practices? What is our greenhouse gas reduction potential here in Illinois? Also, how can we use conservation practices to help us literally weather the storm? And then focus more on some of the on-farm opportunities. What are the components of a soil health system? What are the benefits of investing in soil health practices? We know that these practices can come with associated costs. What's our return on investment for these practices? How can we scale up some of these opportunities with current carbon markets and other financial incentives that might be available? And also look at some of those market approaches and financial assistance that's available. So I really want everyone to come away with not thinking so much about carbon markets today. There's going to be other sessions. I think they're going to focus on carbon markets, but focus on if your goal is to improve the health of your soil and increase the carbon that's in your soil, how can we do that? How can we take a closer look at what these practices, what the advantages are of adopting some of these practices, and then how can we, capture some of the incentives to help make it even more financially viable? So first off, I want to just give some acknowledgements to my colleagues, Dr. Emily Bruner and Jean Brokish from the AFT Midwest team. They have done a lot of work in the past year after all of the carbon markets started to evolve and trying to disseminate that information out to farmers and farm advisors. They've been able to do that through the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership. And I'll show some resources later on that are available to help further educate everyone on the differences in some of these carbon markets. So first off, just want to take a look at kind of where we are today. And this is from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. It just shows the national cover crop adoption rates. You can see Illinois is at around 3%. That has probably ticked up to 5 or 6% here recently. So we're seeing a slow increase in the rate of adoption, but we know there's a lot of room for additional adoption here in Illinois. No-till, on the other hand, about 29% of the acres here in Illinois are no-tilled. The vast majority of those acres are coming from soybeans being no-tilled. That, according to the last Transect survey that was done across the state by the conservation districts, is somewhere around 35% of the acres of soybeans being no-tilled. That was much higher in the early 2000s. Somewhere around 50% of the soybeans were being no-tilled. So we've seen a significant change in soybean tillage since then. Some of that can be attributed to herbicide-resistant weeds, more farmers going back to tillage to take care of those weeds. Also hearing from farmers that using tillage more in wet soils to help dry them out. Corn, on the other hand, has remained fairly steady. Over the last 20-plus years, about 10 or 12% of the corn in the state of Illinois is being no-tilled or strip-tilled, where less than 20% of the surface is being disturbed. So again, great potential here for an increase in adoption from no-till and cover crops. There's a lot of soil health practices, and I'll show those later. I'm going to really focus on no-till and cover crops, mainly because they have the greatest impact on increasing carbon in your soil and improving soil health. So what are some of, as we think about greenhouse gas reduction potentials, and this was a tool developed by AFT looking at the census data and comparing it to Comet Farm information from USDA. What are some of the estimates of what we can potentially reduce as far as greenhouse gases go through the adoption of no-till? So we see here about 0.73 metric tons of carbon dioxide can be saved by converting from intensive till to no-till or strip till. A lot of variability, dependence on some of these numbers, on soil type, the climate, the topography. You can see as you get further south, some of these numbers change as well. Further west, a lot lower. But the largest soil organic carbon increases for no-till are typically associated with temperate locations and more well-drained soils. Estimates of greenhouse gas reduction potential for cover crops, on the other hand, just a little bit lower, 0.49 tons of metric tons of CO2 per acre per year. And this was, again, generated using Comet Farm and through USDA. So again, a lot of potential here for our soils to be used as a carbon sink and also reduce greenhouse gas reductions. One of the things that I've noticed over the past several years in talking with farmers and even experiencing on my own farm is just the more intense and the more frequent rainfall events that we're getting. I remember talking with farmers on fairly flat fields and meeting with them, and they were saying, I've been farming this for the last 30 years. I've never seen erosion like this before. These fields are not typically prone to ephemeral gully erosion. And so I think farmers were starting to notice that some of these changes were taking place. These rainfall events were more intense. We were getting 2 to 4 inch rainfalls in very short amount of times, and it was doing a lot of damage to the soil in the form of soil being lost and soil erosion. Sheet and rill erosion is something that farmers don't always see, but can be more devastating to the amount of overall soil being lost to their land. So, we're seeing, more of these weather and climate disasters taking place. This graph just shows, I think, an estimated $900 and some billion in 2020 from all of these different disasters that have taken place across the U.S. And so what we also have to think about when we're thinking about soil health practices and managing our soils with a soil health management system is how can we make them more resilient to some of these changes. We're also seeing fewer favorable planting days in the spring. And I know, we've seen some research that really points that out, that we just don't have as many days to get our crops planted. And, we're wanting to plant soybeans earlier in the spring. We're wanting to plant corn at the same time. So farmers are adapting. Farmers are getting larger planters. Farmers are getting multiple planters to plant so that they can plant both crops at the same time. But they're making some adjustments. But want to suggest that we also look at how we can make adjustments to the cropland itself and make that soil more resilient. So when we talk about soil health systems, it's really important to acknowledge that there are a lot of different ways to enhance soil health. And soil health is defined by NRCS as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. So by implementing a suite of practices that minimize disturbance, maximize cover, and maximize biodiversity, and also maximize the amount of living roots we have in the soil, there are opportunities for every farm to help increase the soil function across a wide variety of production systems. Whether you're just in a corn-soybean system or if you're in a more diversified crop rotation, or if you're also incorporating livestock onto that land, there's opportunities to help increase the function of that soil. So some of the benefits of investing in soil health. Below the surface, kind of have these broke down by below and above. Of course, increasing soil organic matter. We're increasing carbon sequestration. We can reduce soil compaction by investing in these practices. We're going to see an increased soil microbial diversity in the soil. Plant stress is going to decrease. Pesticide use could decrease. Nutrient cycling within the soil profile is also going to increase. Potential for fertilizer inputs to decrease. And the list goes on and on. Above the surface, we're going to have a cover to protect the soil. We're going to armor the soil. Because of that, we're going to see less evaporation taking place. Infiltration is going to increase. A lot of our soils today are running off a lot more water. That soil is sealing over, and the water is not able to penetrate. And so we're seeing an increase in soil runoff, water running off of that soil. If we're able to infiltrate more water into the soil, we can also store more water in the soil for use later. Flooding risk can potentially go down. If you're irrigating, some of those needs can also go down. Weed suppression. This is one of the things I think that we may see an uptick in cover crop adoption just from the potential for cover crops to suppress weeds. A lot of farmers, as I mentioned earlier, have started to do more tillage to combat herbicide-resistant weeds, but we're also seeing farmers starting to adopt more cover crops to help suppress weeds. And so there's a lot of potential there, and if that's your goal, you need to take that into account when setting seeding rates and seeding dates and a cover crop that's going to have a big impact on suppressing more weeds. And of course, fuel use potentially going down as well, less trips across the field. So all of these things not only are beneficial for the health of the soil, but also as we think about greenhouse gas reductions and the effects of it from that perspective. So, one of the questions we always get asked about soil health practices is, well, this sounds great. We know it's great for water quality, has a lot of environmental benefits, but I still have to make it work with my farming operation. How do I make this cash flow? This is going to require extra management on my part as a farmer, and I'm, I don't want it to be costing me money. I want this to be good for my bottom line. So a couple years we set out to do some soil health economic case studies across the Midwest. We did 4 here in the Midwest, 2 were from Illinois and a couple from Ohio. We wanted to look at, the typical corn-soybean rotation, but we were also focused on farmers that had been doing these soil health practices for at least 5 years. We know there are some challenges, management challenges to the first year of doing some of these practices, and so we wanted to take that kind of out of the equation, focus on some farmers that have been doing this for a little bit of time, which is a challenge to find some of these folks as well. But we worked with these farmers. They had to provide us with a lot of information so that we could do a partial budget analysis, looking at everything from their tillage and machinery costs, their fertilizer inputs, their nutrient management plans, their pesticide and herbicide costs. Also, there's a cost to learning. Everyone is here today. They've taken time out of their schedules to come and learn about something. And there's costs associated with that. We wanted to take that into account as well. When you go home and you look at different YouTube videos on cover crops, or you're researching that, there's certainly costs associated with it. And then ultimately, any changes. So what we found, without going into a whole lot of detail, but we found an annual return on investment, an increase in per acre net income of about $37 per acre. This is taking into account, any financial incentives that they might be getting as well. It's taking into account, the additional costs associated with the practices. That resulted in an average return on investment of 132%. Reduced inputs. One of the biggest here, besides fertilizer savings, was the average machinery and fuel costs. So obviously, doing no-till, these farmers are making less trips across the field, which is resulting in significant savings for them. These studies, you can look more at these studies on farmland.org and type in economic case studies. You can dive a little deeper into those individual case studies and some of the benefits that they saw there. Also the farmer profiles that we did. So looking at a little bigger picture of seven different farms that were part of this study that are also outside the region. We saw 2 farms that had no yield change, 5 farms had increases, change in net income again was up, and return on investment was also increased. This is a little bit larger study, maybe not as in depth with some of the individual information. This was a study from the Soil Health Institute, and I think Cargill was part of this. Surveying 100 different farmers, and you can see some of the results there of benefits from soil health management systems. Increase in yield, reduced fertilizer costs. One of the, we talk about water quality, and so very significant there. 100 of the farmers said, yeah, this is improving my water quality. I think that message has gotten across to a lot of folks. One of the things we don't think about too much, with the lowest on the list there, 41%, is what do adopting some of these practices do for us as far as being able to access more farmland, to get better percentage, loan rates, and also as we think about, insurance. So it's really not something that's been on too many people's radar, and it's obvious from this survey here. So this figure just provides an overview of kind of the national coverage of acres where, changes to soil health management practices could be applied. We have 24 million acres here in Illinois. Just really thinking about the scale of opportunity across the whole U.S. And the 400 million acres that are here. And so by implementing, some of these management practices that build soil health, we can really start to transition some of these lands from a net source of greenhouse gas emissions to potential sinks. This is just an overview of the greenhouse gas emissions and in 2019. Does anybody tell me what the percentage of these emissions come from agriculture? Anybody? So it's 10%. So about 10% of the overall emissions are coming from ag sources. So within that 10%, where are the greenhouse gas emissions coming from? Pre-production, of course, mechanical and non-mechanical and post-production sources. We'll talk a little more about the mechanical side of things. This is why when we talk about no-till, it's so important. 55% of the total ag greenhouse gas emissions are coming from ag soil management. So when we talk about tillage, and we've heard other speakers talk about doing less tillage and the impacts that it could have. Maintaining that crop residue on the surface. So I promised I wasn't going to get into carbon markets, into the depth that we potentially could, but I do want to just talk about how these carbon markets or ecosystem markets, I know Adam Keel's going to talk later today in the carbon track about the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund and some of those markets that are available. But I want us to think about how this can be a tool in our toolbox to help scale some of these soil health systems. As I mentioned, I hope that the priority and one of the main goals is for farmers to want to develop a more productive soil system and improve the soil health. But what these markets can potentially do is they can provide some payments to protect, restore, or mitigate, for impacts to ecosystems. Practices are really no different than what state and federal programs have been incentivizing for several years. But the payments are generated via outcomes, not necessarily practice specific. But also markets exist for carbon sequestration, greenhouse gas reductions, water quality, and others. So when we think about some of these markets, what's driving demand? Consumer demand, corporate responsibility have really motivated a lot of these national and international corporations to set some of these voluntary greenhouse gas emission targets and develop some real science-based strategies to achieve desirable environmental outcomes. On the left here is supply chain, and on the right are some of the players that are in that phase. And so you can see there, one of the big drivers, from the packaged good manufacturing. So think about PepsiCo, General Mills, Kellogg's, and others that are also responding to some of this consumer demand. So what some of my colleagues that I mentioned earlier did was kind of take a look at some of the potential payments, just to give you an idea. I'm not here to try to promote any one carbon market over another, but I think it's good for us to have a better understanding of what these payments potentially look like. So using some of the potential reduction equivalents that I talked about earlier, you can see, adopting a cover crop in Illinois could potentially equate to a payment of around $7. Couple that with Notill, through some of the carbon markets, and the payment could potentially be around $10.95, $11. And I think it's also good to compare these to some of the existing programs. EQIP and CSP are Natural Resources Conservation Service programs, or NRCS. And you can see what some of the payment rates are for the same practices that are listed there. And we also know that there's certainly challenges with enough available funding for some of those programs, and in a lot of cases, if you went into your local office, there would be a backlog of applications for some of these programs, and may not be able to get payments through some of those federal programs. So again, I don't want to focus on a lot of these programs. You've probably heard a lot of these names like NORI, Indigo. Again, Adam's going to talk a little more about the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, Ecosystem Services Market Consortium as well. The list goes on and on. The BEAR U.S. Carbon Program, which is more of a practice-based program. Corteva, Nutrien. This list hasn't been updated in a while. There's new players coming online all of the time. But I just wanted to give you a sense of maybe what's out there when you start to think about some of the market availability. And the other thing, we talk a little bit, about additionality. Some of these farmers often get asked the question, well, I've been doing these practices. Why am I not eligible for some of these programs? And that's a great question. We also know from some of the previous slides that there's not a lot of farmers in this category. With the current adoption rates, and the focus for a lot of these carbon markets is on new acres, getting new acres, which is also great. But we can't forget about some of the farmers that have been doing these practices for years, and making sure that they are part of this as well. And so that's where I think CSP, we got to think back to some of our USDA programs. CSP, is really designed to pay farmers for some of the practices that they're already doing, but also encourage, the adoption of maybe some new practices and providing incentives for them there. EQIP, providing incentives for cover crops and no-till, strip-till, lot of great opportunities there. The other one I want to talk a little bit about that AFT spent a significant amount of time is developing some of the crop insurance discounts. And I know there was a question about, coupling crop insurance and conservation practices earlier this morning. So if you're not familiar with the Fall Covers for Spring Savings Program, it's essentially a $5 per acre discount. If you planted cover crops, that $5 discount comes off of your crop insurance bill the following year. And so you plant cover crops in the fall, you take out an approved insurance plan, and you get that discount. So what does that do? So currently it hopefully is incentivizing more farmers to plant more cover crops. We also know there's a lot of farmers out there that are planting cover crops on a small portion of their land. And so, we also want to encourage for them to increase the adoption of cover crops on their land. We also know that most farmers that are doing cover crops are no-tilling into those cover crops. So we get two practices with one program, essentially. We also know that crop insurance is the trusted safety net of farmers. It's already 60% subsidized through the Farm Bill, and farmers trust it. There was some concerns 5 or 6 years ago about if I plant cover crops, will my crop insurance be void? Most of those issues have been resolved over the years, and a lot of those changes have taken place. This past year, Illinois had about 100,000 acres available, which is not near enough, but they did have 100,000 acres available for farmers. That sold out in one day. So we know that there's a real demand for that type of program. It's simple, it's easy to apply for. You just have to certify your acres with FSA. So these are some of these practices that, or some of these programs that farmers can be eligible for to help provide them with some additional incentives. I think we're going to see a lot more programs coming out of NRCS and even FSA and RMA, the Risk Management Agency. Last year, farmers in Illinois, about 540,000 acres were certified of having used cover crops. Those farmers, in addition to the state program, also received a $5 premium discount. And it's likely that program will be back again this year. But thinking about how we can use these programs as a driver for new practice adoption. So just a couple more slides left. She gave me a warning up here. So as we think about advice for farmers, whether you're a farmer yourself or whether you advise farmers, the first question, again, is the farmer committed to improving soil health, or is he just solely motivated by some of these financial incentives? We have to realize that maybe some of these current payments, they may not be enough. Therefore, we really have to be realistic. We have to also recognize that market participation is going to require additional management changes. Goes back to additionality and also technical support. These are really true for farmers motivated by soil health as well. What's the difference? Records. Market participation is going to require a lot of record management as well, and you have to consider the time that it's going to take to keep those records. I think we also have to think about, what is the value of carbon? And is the value in improved soil health, which also leads to better water quality and supports more resilient and profitable farms. Here's just a few resources. I've talked about some of these from our farmland.org website, also Illinois Sustainable Ag, some of the ecosystem markets, a little deeper dive into those as well that are available. This work over the past year and a half has really been well received by farmers, farm advisors, other groups, because it provides kind of an honest broker approach to the markets that are available. And we all know there's a lot of information about those markets, and a lot of it's being driven by the market itself. So just kind of finishing up in summary, the adoption of soil health systems can increase crop resiliency and return on investment. Ecosystem markets can help to incentivize adoption beyond acreages supported by state and federal programs. And not all practices and programs fit every farm, and farmers really need to set some realistic goals and then find a practice or a program that suits their own individual needs. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.